Okay, so it's March 8th, and as I said in other videos, I'm doing the abortion deaths separately today because I have a lot of information on them, and they're all very different, except for these two women who died the same day in New York after taking advantage of New York's progressive abortion law that allowed unfettered outpatient abortion on demand before Roe v. Wade made that the law of the land across the country. And before this law went into effect, Milton Halpern, who was the chief medical examiner of New York City, was not enthused that, that this is some kind of really great idea. He expressed a lot of concern that ill-equipped and poorly staffed freestanding abortion clinics were going to pose a danger to women. And he was right. Um, so we can look at the two different cases that were a little further down the line in 1972, or in early March, a woman, pseudonym Colleen, traveled from Michigan to New York for a safe legal abortion. Um, there seemed to be a pipeline from Michigan, possibly following Jesse Ketchum, who was responsible for two deaths um, after legalization. She was 21 years old and 20 weeks pregnant with a history of asthma. And during the abortion, she went into respiratory arrest. So she died March 8th, 1972. And so did a young woman, pseudonym Connie. She was 31 years old, and her abortion was performed specifically on March 3rd. And she went into cardiac arrest during the abortion. And she died March 8th, leaving behind one child. So we can kind of look at what happened in New York. And like I said, the idea was if you legalize, all of a sudden women are going to stop dying from um, abortion quackery. But we can look, the law went into effect in June, and there were in June of 1970, and there were three women who died in July of 1970 from safe legal abortions. A woman, pseudonym Judy, went into cardiac arrest during the abortion. A young woman named Carmen, um, I'll provide a link to a video about these saline abortions where they would pull out amniotic fluid and put in a really concentrated salt solution to kill the baby, and they accidentally injected it into Carmen's bloodstream. And then Barbara, um, a doctor had recommended an abortion because she had sickle cell disease, and the abortion actually triggered a sickle cell crisis that killed her. And I don't see any more deaths until September of 1970, when a young woman, pseudonym Amanda, um, was sent back to her home in Indiana with a hole poked in her uterus that had not been treated. Then in October 1970, a young woman named Maria went in for an abortion, and the doctor accidentally shoved the fetus through the back of her uterine wall into her abdomen. And when she didn't fish out any fetal parts, she assumed that Maria hadn't actually been pregnant and sent her home, and she died. We go ahead to December of 1970, and a young woman, pseudonym Kimberly, went into cardiac arrest during her abortion. Then we have two deaths in January of 71. A young woman, pseudonym Amy, suffered a massive pulmonary embolism. That was when stuff that wasn't supposed to be in her bloodstream got into her lungs, and she wasn't able to get enough oxygen into her blood. And then the other one was pseudonym Amanda, and she suffered an overwhelming infection. Then in April of 71, a young woman, pseudonym Sandra, had an abortion, and they did the pathology report and found no fetus, but they didn't tell her. And she was just overwhelmed with grief after her abortion and killed herself. Then in May of 71, a young woman, pseudonym Anita, was injected with saline outpatient. And these are the things these doctors were doing. And it's similar to what they're doing today, um, where the late abortions are done um, by killing the fetus and then kind of letting the mother deliver the fetus. And the big difference is that back in 1971, they were using this salt solution because they didn't have the ultrasound to guide a needle straight into the baby's heart like they do nowadays and inject a drug into the baby's heart to kill it. Um, so Anita had amniotic fluid pulled out, this saline um, injected, and she was sent home to just expel her baby at home. And that's another difference. Now they keep them in motels, and instead of sending them home, they send them to the motel and schedule them to come back to the clinic and push the baby out into the toilet at the clinic. Whereas back then they were just sending them in New York, they were just sending them home. So they sent Anita home and she bled to death. Then there are two deaths in June of 71. One is Margaret, who traveled from Ypsilanti to have her abortion performed by Jesse Ketchum. And I did a video about him. This guy was a little bit questionable, but he didn't have any dead abortion patients in his illegal practice. But when New York legalized, he went carpetbagging there, took to taking astonishing chances, performing actual surgery in his office, and Margaret bled to death. And then a young woman, pseudonym Anita, just went into cardiac arrest. Then in July of 1971, a young woman, pseudonym Audrey, went to cardiac arrest during her abortion. Two deaths in August. One, pseudonym Vicky, developed a post-abortion infection, and one, pseudonym April, was injected with saline for an outpatient abortion, went into shock and died. In September of 71, a young woman, pseudonym Barbara, went into cardiac arrest after the saline was injected for her abortion. Two deaths in October of 71. A young woman, pseudonym Tammy, died from massive post-abortion infection. And a woman named Carol, who traveled from out of state to Jesse Ketchum, died the same kind of death that Margaret did, from him doing outpatient surgery, cutting open the uterus and pulling the baby out. And then he didn't sew the hole shut. And then in December of 71, a young woman, pseudonym Beth, they were injecting the saline supposedly into the amniotic sac to kill the baby. Instead, they got it into her bloodstream and killed her. Then in February, a woman, pseudonym Roseanne, they injected her with saline and she reacted to it and started vomiting, and she inhaled what she was throwing up. It got into her lungs and caused what's called aspiration pneumonia, and she died. In April, a young woman, pseudonym Julie, had holes torn in her uterus and bowel, and that killed her. And then three deaths in May of 71. A young woman, pseudonym Robin, suffered lingering complications. Pseudonym Roxanne was given an overdose of abortion sedatives, which continues to happen. I have a pretty cage full of deaths from that, as Screwtape would put it. And then a young woman, pseudonym Danielle. Somehow they got air into her bloodstream. And those deaths are in addition to Colleen and Connie.